Hi everyone, I'm Nick Altmeyer with linkinglewiscounty.com, here today with Ian Gilbert and Joan McNichol, both members of the Lewis County Bar Association. So we have Ian and Joan here today to talk about Law Day. Just a disclaimer before we start, Law Day was actually on May 1st, and you guys came into the office last week and we filmed a little piece like this for Law Day to run on Sunday, May 1st. And when we went to edit the video, there were some technical difficulties, so we weren't able to actually run it on Law Day. So we apologize for that, and we really thank you guys for agreeing to sit back down with us and have this conversation. So even though it's not Law Day, we're still doing this for Law Day, and some of the material I looked at kind of referred to May as Law Month.
It's celebrated all month long.
All month long.
Yep.
Okay, so why don't you give us a little bit of history on Law Day, Ian? What
Sure.
actually was Law Day, and how did it come about?
Sure. So Law Day was originally proposed, and I think by presidential proclamation in the 1950s by President Eisenhower. And the idea of Law Day is it is supposed to be a celebration of the rule of law in the United States and of our Constitution. And of course, the Constitution in the United States, it is the bedrock legal document. It defines some of our most closely cherished rights, like our rights to freedom of speech, of religion, of due process, and also sets up the basic framework for how our Republican form of government has existed since the time of the nation's founding. So Law Day celebrates the Constitution, and then of course the rule of law, which really is the basis of any free society, any society that cherishes liberty and justice, having a system of laws and then attorneys who are sworn to uphold those laws is all very important.
Right. And I think is there some reasoning behind why May 1st was picked to celebrate Law Day?
So a little bit of research I found out was part of it was to contrast from May Day, which was a big holiday in the Soviet Union at the time. It's an interesting contrast. Of course, this was during the Cold War,
right.
But the Soviet Union had a constitution, which is kind of neat to think about. And in many ways, that constitution was more expansive than the American Constitution. It guaranteed, many of the same rights we have, and also the right to a job. But of course, in practice, the Soviets didn't have constitutional rights. There was no enforcement mechanism for those rights, and they didn't have the sort of institutions in place as we do in the United States with our court system, with our democratic processes that also allow us to preserve those rights. So
right.
Part of the idea there, in the 1950s was to contrast and also educate our country about what it was that made the United States special and why those things were so important.
Right.
And Nick, if I could just add to that, that in addition, I think that what the celebration of Law Day has become over the years is, especially for bar associations, members of the bar to be involved and to help educate in the local communities and remind people of the rule of law and how important our democracy is, and the rule of law standing behind that. So that's why we're here.
Exactly. And one thing and to kind of bring to people, especially some of our younger viewers and things like that, the importance of, like you said, the rule of law and educating new people into the profession and getting them to come back to their hometowns and the rural areas and things like that. So I know we talked a little bit about what are some of the educational requirements to go into law school.
So you do have to have a bachelor's degree.
And that can be in anything. In anything.
And in fact, if you ask a lot of people who went to law school, their majors varied tremendously. And law school is a 3-year commitment. Some schools allow for part-time attendance, so it may extend for 4 years. Night school, some law schools do night school. But it's basically a 3-year commitment, and you come out, if you're successful, with a Juris Doctorate, and then in New York State you have to take the bar exam in order to practice law.
And there are some entrance exams before you can get accepted into a law school as well?
LSATs, another way for law schools to gauge whether or not you meet their minimum requirements.
Okay. And I think we, in the playing off the last interview that we did that people weren't able to see, part of the thing that's interesting to me is that pretty much any field law can fit into. So whether you're interested in healthcare, I mean, there's legal teams working in healthcare profession, media, there's, you know, legal teams that work in media, lots of the corporations, and, you know, you manufacture anything has kind of a legal aspect to it. So I know we have the two of you from the Bar Association because you represent different sectors of the legal profession.
So now I'm representing the public sector as the county attorney, and in fact, Ian is one of my bosses, but we don't have to talk about that here.
As a legislator, yeah.
As a legislator.
Ian is also a private practice
Yes.
attorney, so you kind of represent the private sector of the law side.
That's probably one of the big divides with the profession is those who go into public service work or private sector work. And of course, Joan, you started in the private sector and moved into the public sector. So there's movement, you know, attorneys move around in their fields. Whereas Joan represents one client, she devotes her time to representing the County of Lewis. I'm a private attorney. I own my own firm. I work for myself. I worked for other firms in the past, but now I'm a solo practitioner. So I represent a multitude of clients, and I mostly work in the realm of transactional law. So business type stuff, real estate, estate planning, kind of what I'd call the bread and butter of legal work, especially in a community like ours. But in addition to being just a lawyer, I am a business owner, so a lot of the same stuff you'd see in any type of business, you know, making sure your vendors get paid, collecting, you know, payments that are due to you, doing your bookkeeping and keeping up on, you know, newest software and things like that.
Very familiar with all that.
It's all
it's a 24/7 life.
But it's a good life. I enjoy it very much, and I like being my own, you know, boss and being able to define my own hours and the scope of work I get to do. I enjoy that a lot.
Yeah, there's pros and cons in the public sector and the private sector. The public sector, to me, having come from the private sector in my own firm or with my husband, and having that daily grind to do everything for the business, to do all the bookkeeping, all the reporting that's required of attorneys. I practiced in family law field, so there's form requirements that you would have to prepare on every case, so it's very time consuming and paper heavy. And that's not to say that's not the case for me working in the public sector now, because I review all the contracts for the county and resolutions and documents like that. But it's a different take.
Fit your 9 to 5 as well, and not have
pretty
to
much, unless there's something. Well, I do work sometimes on the weekends, and I am available to the board 24/7. But fortunately, it's not the same kind of emergency as you have sometimes for clients or in the private practice where you're trying to take in as much business as possible. So that's a big difference. And I came from a different area, so what I'd also like to talk about is the fact that I see in Lewis County a terrific need for us as practicing attorneys and members of the bar to do what we can to let people know that the practice of law in a rural community can be just as rewarding as somebody who thinks about joining a big firm downstate or in the city where they make very big numbers starting out right from law school. But I find it very invigorating to work in a small community and really feel as if I'm helping in my role in the public sector to help everybody in Lewis County. And I know that the practicing attorneys feel the same way. We just need some more, I feel.
And when I was coming out of law school about 6 years ago, statewide there was a glut of attorneys. There were too many attorneys entering into the market without enough positions to absorb them. That was true statewide, but in upstate New York, in the North Country in particular, there's been a real lack of attorneys. And I read a statistic once, I think it was in South Carolina, but some I don't know how they came up with it, but they said that a small town attorney, you know, a Main Street attorney who has his or her shingle just hanging on, you know, outside their office, they can generate more than $2 for every dollar that comes into their office. So we are business people, we are engaged in the local economy, and for people to have local resources where they can get those types of legal services that they need, that helps to keep money in the local economy. It's just like choosing where you want to buy, your food or the things, that you enjoy. You can buy it locally or be forced to look elsewhere. And oftentimes looking elsewhere, it's going to be quite a bit more expensive too.
So a lot of the attorneys, private practice attorneys, well known in Lewis County, kind of noticed over the last 3-4 years, a lot of people have been retiring and things like that. So which is really, like you said, kind of left a void and opened up a need for attorneys and things like that. So not only speaking to people coming out of high school and thinking about going to law school and things like that, but you mentioned, if you have a bachelor's degree in any kind of field and you feel like, you want to try something different, maybe, you want to try your hand at law, how would somebody go about, like, getting their foot into the door to starting that process?
So, it would be a good idea to talk to some attorneys and get a sense of what it's like to practice law and what you do to try to apply. When I was in law school, there were many people who already had careers. There were policemen, there were journalists, a variety of people who decided to go back and learn, the law, and became practitioners. And some of them were fantastic practitioners because they had such life experiences as well.
Right.
So it's open to everyone, and you have to go through the same process. You have to take you have to apply to law schools, make that commitment for 3 years, and you have to pass the bar exam as well. But it can be a very rewarding experience and career if somebody is really interested in the law. And there are so many different areas of the law to practice. That's why it's so engaging.
And many attorneys don't even necessarily practice law. Like a lot of them will go into journalism, or they might go into the business world. Just you mentioning a few people you knew, a good friend of mine in law school was a retired Air Force colonel. Decided he wanted to start a new adventure in his life, went to law school, did very well, graduated, and then found an upper level management position in a small business in his hometown. So that, I don't know if he ever technically practiced law, but the skills that he developed certainly have come to apply to the work that he's doing.
Right. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about what role lawyers play and how you become part of the law profession and things like that. Let's talk a little bit about going back to the law day and the rule of the law and things like that. What role do lawyers play in the rule of law? Like, what would a society without the rule of law and lawyers look like?
That's a very good question. So the first job first of all, I should say all attorneys practicing in New York State and elsewhere, we swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and of the state of New York. And regardless of who you are, we are officers of the court. Whether you're in private practice or public practice, we are officers of the court. Just like any other court official would be. And part of that responsibility for attorneys, it includes things like pro bono work. We're expected to give up a certain amount of time to do free work for the public, for the public benefit. I do some work for churches and local charities that I'm involved in, either free or at a reduced rate. And then we're also at times expected to call, maybe not so much if your job precludes it, but for private sector attorneys, we're called up sometimes to represent indigent clients. The court I've received notices from the court where I've been appointed to represent people in certain types of cases where they couldn't afford representation. And so that's something that, we take a lot of pride in being able to do that kind of work. But really what a lawyer does is it is our job to counsel persons, individuals, or clients on their legal rights and remedies that they have available to them, and part of that is to correct injustices and in many cases to avoid problems down the road.
And basically you guys carry out what the law prescribes.
Right.
So what's spelled out in the Constitution, federal, state, things like that.
And we have a commitment, and Ian talks about the oath that we take. We also have a commitment to legal ethics and a standard of how we behave in court, representing somebody, being honest, being fair-minded, and not trying to misrepresent
a duty of
somebody to the court or to an adversary, because the rule of law really demands that, because
Right.
Yeah.
you can't have justice
Right.
if people aren't following the rule of law.
Yeah, and as along with that, the phrase that came into mind was a duty of candor. We have a duty of
Yep.
candor to the court, to any judge, and then also a duty of, I think well, there's a fiduciary duty to the client, but also fairness in how we
Right.
deal with one another. And it's interesting because we talk about the legal system as an adversarial system, and it is. We oftentimes represent different clients with different interests who are at odds with each other.
Right.
And the role of the attorney, whether you are the one let's say in a criminal context, if you're prosecuting that case, you need to do everything that you can within the code of ethics and your duties as an attorney
Right.
to prosecute and pursue that case.
Right.
And if you're the defense attorney, it is your job to do everything in your power
Right.
to properly defend your client. And it's in that adversarial system that at the end of the day, hopefully the truth and the justice are realized. And that's
Right.
aspirational. It isn't always achieved,
Right.
but that's certainly the goal. And I think, the United States isn't perfect, but compared to
Right.
most of the world, we've definitely done a lot of good.
And you talk about ethics and things like that. So you guys are both members of the Lewis County Bar Association.
Yes.
Each county, state, things like that have their bar associations, but that's kind of like an overseeing entity that kind of disciplinary action could come through the bar
The
association.
disciplinary action actually comes through the appellate division.
Okay, but you can be disbarred and not be allowed to be a member of your
right.
bar association.
Yeah, the county bar the state bar refers to all attorneys who are sworn in.
Okay.
A bar association is basically, it's a local club.
Okay.
So you can practice in Lewis County. The bar association, it's like the Rotary Club, basically.
Got you. Okay.
But we do advocate for our profession. We advocate for clients' rights and things like that. And,
Okay.
and we work together to try to advance the cause of justice, certainly.
But there's a state board that oversees. So,
Correct.
Yes.
if somebody had a complaint, or if even if you have a colleague that you felt was not adhering to ethics and things like that, that
We're
would be
technically supposed to
Yeah.
oblige to disclose that
right.
to the ethics board.
Right.
For the
But,
state.
which all goes through the Court of Appeals eventually.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So basically, you guys have to have a license to practice law in New York State.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
and that
And
can
that's
be,
why you have to take that bar exam
Mhm.
after law school.
Right.
And if you pass that, you also go before their professional board, and they look at your history and your
Right.
background, and then you can become a member of the board,
Gotcha.
of,
Alright.
of the profession.
Right. All right. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to mention about?
Well, one thing I thought of, which I wished I'd mentioned in the earlier interview, I just thought of it. Law school has changed a little bit in recent years, and for people who are interested in law school, the first year law school, it's basically the same for everybody. You cover the same core classes like
Right.
civil procedure, constitutional law, criminal law. Later on, there's a lot of opportunity now, probably more so than in years past, but there's more of an opportunity to do things like clinical work.
Yes.
Getting credits for that type of thing. And when I was in law school, I worked for my university's Rural Economic Development Clinic, which I
Okay.
really enjoyed
Right.
a lot. And I was actually able to get credits through law school. And I had some kind of provisional sort of authority by this was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is where I went to law school, to actually represent clients in a very limited capacity under the supervision of a professor. And
Right.
I enjoyed that, and that was part of what led me to want to come back to the North Country
Right.
and pretty much continue the same stuff I was doing in clinic.
Right.
So
And
that's something that I love law school. If people are interested in it, I'd call any of the attorneys up. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. It's definitely
Right.
a different experience from undergrad.
Right.
But I would encourage anybody who's interested to at least look into it.
Right. And I know Joan touched on it earlier, but you've practiced in big city area as well as the rural North Country, Lewis County as well. So you really have a perspective on, and you talked about the differences in between the two. But like we talked about before, there's a very big need right now in the rural communities for law professionals. So anybody that even already has a law degree, maybe has moved away and is looking to come back or looking for something to do, just to put it out there, there's a lot of opportunity right now just because
There
a
certainly
lot of
is.
doors have closed.
And it can be very rewarding. And that's not to say there aren't negatives about it. I've been practicing for over 40 years, and there are negatives to
I think
it.
you'll find that in any profession.
Yes, and that's the truth, and that's why in the law you have the opportunity to change what you're doing in the
Right.
law, which is what I did,
Right.
and it was refreshing.
Right.
So there's many opportunities, many different areas, as Ian said, to
Right.
develop an expertise in something. And the nice thing about bar associations and perhaps practicing in smaller communities is that I think for the most part, the attorneys in the area are there to help one another.
Right.
I could call up Ian, he could call up
Right.
me, or we could call other attorneys to ask them about a particular area of the law
Right.
that you're not necessarily familiar with, and everybody is there to assist.
Right.
Yeah, and one of the things that's been wonderful for me, I've been on my own now for 6 months, but when I was first starting out, a lot of the other local attorneys, my colleagues in the Bar Association, were giving me bits and pieces of work. You know, when I was
Right.
looking to build my practice and my
Right.
portfolio,
Yep.
they were, you know, hey, I got this person who could use a little help. I know you practice in this area.
Yep.
Would you be interested in meeting with the person? And,
Right.
and sometimes I'll give stuff back to them
Right.
if I know that they're a better fit for that particular
Right.
client. And I say that if someone reaches out to me looking for legal advice, if I can't provide it to them, I'll try to find somebody else who can.
Yes.
Or if it, you know, if they can't afford it, try
Right.
to put them in touch with legal aid
Right.
or the attorney referral network to see if there's someone out there who can help them out.
Right.
That, again, to what Joan said, that's a benefit of being in a small, close-knit bar.
Right.
Yeah,
That
we know
definitely-
everyone.
And I keep going back to the fact that it seems like one of the only professions that kind of covers like anything that you might have an interest in. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Whether sports, even. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like the
Yes.
big sports teams
Yes,
have an office full of
You know, if you
attorneys
have
and-
an interest in
um,
environmental
environment, yeah.
issues,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, it really can be anything
be
that
anything.
you have an interest
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Kind of requires a law professional at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So, very, very good. Well, we really appreciate you guys sitting back down with us. And again, we apologize for the technical difficulties in our first try, but really happy we were able to get this out there for people. So once again, you both belong to the Lewis County Bar Association.
Yes.
Like you mentioned, it's just kind of a club of the
Yeah.
local law professionals. And you guys might be a little bit more visible coming up over the next year or so.
yeah, where, you know, with
getting more involved in the
COVID, with
community
COVID,
and-
there wasn't really much going on.
Yep.
But we have, I'm the vice president currently, and we have, I think, about 25 or 30 members.
Okay.
And that's anybody who lives in Lewis County who's an
Mhm.
attorney or practices in Lewis County. So you
Okay.
could live somewhere else and still be a member of our
Right.
bar. And we're starting to meet more regularly
Yep.
and hopefully in person pretty soon. And we have some ideas of things we want to do with the community, with
Right.
younger people,
Right.
and so.
Well, hopefully this gauges a little bit of interest for some
Yeah.
people, and even I guess if it triggers one person to think that this might be a path that they want to go down, we
It'll be
definitely need it
Yeah.
here
Yes.
for sure.
Definitely.
Yes.
Well, thanks guys, we really
And thank
appreciate
you for
it.
doing
All right,
this.
thank you, Nick.
Okay.